right, welcome to another episode of Healthy for My Purpose. We have the privilege and the honor to be here with the wonderful Leigh Ettinger, otherwise known as the Herbivore Doctor or Doctor Herbivore. And we're going to have a conversation with him about a topic that so many of us I know that once we've started going plant-based have struggled with if you have family is how do you bring your family on board, and we're going to talk about it in all stages of life. We're going to tackle the babies and we're going to go right up to your adult children and your teenagers and everything in between. So we're so excited to have you, Dr. Leigh. So let's jump right in. One of the biggest things, and I know for myself, I've personally experienced this, is you come into this new way, this new lifestyle of eating plant-based, you're taking charge of your health, maybe you've suffered from obesity or high blood pressure, and you're on your road to living healthy, and you know everything about what food does to the body and all of that. And then you come home and it doesn't match, right? Maybe you have a spouse or you have children that you've been feeding them a certain way for the longest time, and then you've made this change, and now you're trying to help your family transition, but there's resistance. And one of the things that Gigi and I talk about in our program is breaking generational patterns of poor health and seeing yourself as a part of that process of breaking those chains. And so we want to just get right to the root of it. Like, how is it possible? First of all, is it possible? Can you go home as the only person and just have your children who's been eating the chips and eating the junk and eating all of these things and say, hey guys, we're going whole food plant-based, and they're kicking and screaming? How does this happen? How does it make it work? I'm curious myself because I've been in the trenches, and to be honest, I'm a little bit still in the trenches. So I'm so eager to hear what you got to say.
Okay. First of all, thank you, Sersie and Gigi, for having me back on your talk here, your chat. I'm really excited to catch up with you too.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it can be hard, certainly, like you said, to come home and be all excited about the plant-based diet for yourself, but then you have the rest of your family that it's important to nourish them, and like you said, maybe they're resisting change. But speaking particularly about the kids, I kind of don't blame them. They're not being bad kids. They're not being headstrong or talking back or something like that. They're just being kids who are interested in their own survival too. So if they're used to calories and salt and added sugar and fat way up there, and then that's all of a sudden yanked away, their brain's going to be like, wait a second, how am I going to survive on this lower calorie food? And 100,000 years ago, the child would be in an extreme stress if they weren't getting the calories to survive the upcoming winter, the upcoming famine that was probably going to happen. So you could see how we have this survival instinct built in, that all of our senses are geared to getting those extra calories, and our brain centers reward us when we do find those extra calories. So to come in and say, well, we're not preparing for the next winter anymore, that could be frightening for a child. Why are these people that are supposed to be nourishing me and preparing me for any hardship yanking away all this good stuff? So it's just the evolutionary mismatch situation we're in, whereas all of our desires are geared toward preparing our bodies for any hardships, but those hardships aren't coming. We're just having feast after feast after feast.
Yeah, so I think when I think about this, I think about it in terms of like where the child is in their stage of development.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, like if we're talking about infants, it's not really an issue. It's not like a non-starter. You just go ahead and move them over, right? Or they're already on it in most cases. It's just keeping them on it. But then when you get into the toddlers, and the preschoolers, when you start, like I can remember as a child, I'm kind of the middle kid in my family. And so my sister's the youngest. And I remember when she was I was probably like a preschooler or I don't know, second grader or whatever. And I can remember going to Burger King or McDonald's and all she would order is French fries, Coke, and ketchup. That was her standard order, French fries, Coke, and ketchup. And she just got so hooked on those French fries and with the ketchup, of course, and washing it down with Coke that, I think it starts at an early age when we don't, like as adults, we don't realize we're passing our food addictions on to our children. And so all of a sudden we get the light, like, oh my goodness, I've been doing this for so many years. And then you realize, oh my goodness, I've been doing this to my children. How, like, in your practice, have you found ways to, get even toddlers or preschoolers kind of moving in the direction of eating more whole plant foods, even if it's not, they've gone, full on all the way, but like, what are some strategies you've used or seen that have been helpful?
Well, the good thing about eating more plants is that you get more fiber in your diet, and that can be very filling. And so you can encourage these fruits and vegetables and starches and whole grains and get the child more full. So hopefully they're satisfied, and that survival instinct that we have can be satisfied and not be seeking out and craving all that extra stuff anymore. Even if you can say you can have that junk food, like what we call junk food, after you have this, then maybe they'll eat less of the junkier food because they're fuller on the plant fiber. They can have the treat after, working and negotiating with them like that. Another way that I work with the younger kids, we're talking about like elementary school kids, is that there's just so many other benefits about plant-based eating that it doesn't have to be necessarily an argument about calories or junk food or health food. For example, my own two daughters were in elementary school when my family switched to plant-based, and they were like, oh, we love animals. We don't have to eat animals anymore. Oh, great. It was like an easier switch for them when we brought that angle into the conversations. This is now important to the family. We don't want to eat animals, cute animals anymore. So it's nice for an older kid who's maybe learning about the environment in school and the concerns that people have about the environment. We can talk about how eating more plant-based creates less waste and uses less resources and is overall better for the environment. So I like that there are different angles that we can approach that the child might be interested in, because a child's not necessarily worried about heart disease or diabetes or things like that. But if you can talk to them on a wavelength that they understand and appreciate at their developmental stage, then all the better.
Yeah, I love that you said that because it's helping that child develop their why. And sometimes we go into it with our why, high blood pressure, and they're like, I mean, I'm fine. They're kids, they can't connect with that. So I really like that you brought in the idea of finding a why from a child's perspective, like the animals and the environment. The other thing I really liked that you talked about is coming in from that empathy standpoint, that they too are having to pull away from those foods that they've been eating for all this time. And so we come in sometimes and just say, do this, do that. And we forget that they're just like us and they have to go through that process. And so could you just go a little deeper into, because I love the fact that you said your children were in elementary school. Tell us a little deeper about how you made your whole family transition, because I think we say it lightly, like, oh yeah, my whole family went plant-based, but tell us some of those intricate pieces, because that's kind of an amazing thing. A lot of people are trying to do that. What did it look like for your family? How did you do it? And what are some tips that you can glean from that for the rest of us listening?
Right. My kids, it took them about 2 weeks to notice that the milk had changed. All of a sudden, they were like, oh, hey, the milk carton is different. Why is that? You can kind of just start replacing stuff. And there are so many plant-based products, chicken nuggets and plant-based meats and cheeses and stuff like that, that sometimes it can be as easy as switching out with a plant-based alternative. And then really trying to encourage feeding and filling up on fruit. The kids, they have smaller stomachs than adults. So eating 3 big meals 3 times a day doesn't necessarily work so well with how their intestines work. That's why they're eating such small amounts and are always being encouraged to clean their plate at the meal, but then an hour or 2 later they're looking for snacks again. It's just because they fill up quickly and their stomach will empty quickly, so they're looking for snacks. So grazing, I think that grazing is more appropriate for a child with a small stomach, that they can eat smaller meals and have snacks in between. So really trying to encourage the fruits and having vegetable snacks that they like, maybe dipping in hummus or things like that they can easily snack on before they go rummaging around. I like to keep, we've talked about this before, I like to keep bananas out so that when you walk in the kitchen, you can see, and you're hungry and you want a snack, you see the banana first thing, and you can grab that before feeling the need to rummage through the pantry or the refrigerator. So those are some tips. And then also for the person's interest, for example, we're still talking about elementary school kids. If they are interested in animal welfare, maybe visiting an animal sanctuary to kind of see. A lot of kids have never met a cow, never seen a chicken or petted a pig or things like that. So getting them to connect with their food in that way. Or even if in the area of fruit picking or apple picking, I think that these are good ways to teach a young kid kind of where the food comes from and what it looks like when it's picked and how to pick foods. So those kind of things I think are developmentally appropriate for the elementary school age, so that they can start to get a more hands-on experience. Having the child pick out recipes and pick out grocery shopping and picking out and working together in the kitchen is also very developmentally appropriate, so that they can get some skin in the game almost with what they're preparing and what they're eating, and making decisions about what they want, and kind of giving them a sense of control. My parents tell me that they used to giving me, when I was a young child, a choice, like, would you like corn on the cob tonight or corn in a bowl, already, or maybe popcorn? But like they were getting, say, corn into me and making it appear that it was my choice. But they were really, all paths led to getting more corn into me, for example. So giving a child like kind of that sense of autonomy and starting to make decisions about their food by kind of giving them guidance in the plant-based realm is another good step for.
I'm listening to you, and I'm sitting here thinking I have to make sure my husband doesn't listen to this podcast, because I play that trick on him. Would you like your kale steamed, or would you like it in a salad, or would you like it in a smoothie?
There you go. See, it works for all ages.
Works for all ages.
That's hilarious. So another question I have is, can you talk about the picky eater as a child? Because I find that when you're dealing with a picky eater, it's a whole nother dynamic in terms of trying to get them to try new things and to eat new plants. And then on the other side, could you talk a little bit about the child who's resisting, and should you be arguing over food, and should you be yelling and screaming over at the dinner? I'm asking for a friend. Like, should you be, should there be this tug of war, or how do you diffuse that, and how do you move away from that conflict? Because then there's a conflict around food, and move into more of a gentler way of handling that.
Right. So there's the I'm blanking on the name of this feeding theory. Maybe the Ellen Slatter feeding division of responsibility, it's called, if someone searches feeding division of responsibility. So the parent is responsible for the what and the when of mealtime and snack times, like what you're going to eat, when you're going to eat it. And the child is responsible for how much they're going to eat. So the parent is putting out and preparing, again, we're talking about younger kids and picky eaters, The parent is responsible for selecting the foods and preparing them and giving the options to the child, and the child can decide how much, and that may be zero, that they're just not going to eat it, and then they're not going to eat that meal. And the child will get hungry, the child will eventually eat, and it can be hard as a parent not to feed our children. Again, we have these instincts, but the child's not, no harm is going to come to the child for missing one meal. And even if they go to bed hungry, they'll wake up and try again the next day. And that can be extremely uncomfortable for a parent, but the child will eventually eat. Again, unless there's like something medical going on or something else developmentally. Certainly there are children with special needs that this wouldn't be appropriate for, but for your basic child, then you got to work with them, and they have to realize that they can't say no to the food and then 10 minutes later be getting cookies, because that's just going to kind of train them that they don't have to eat what is being prepared, and the treat will come later no matter what. So it does take some resolve, some parenting resolve, and I'm kind of glad my kids are out of that stage. But yeah, if you can learn more, there's resources online about this division of responsibility when feeding kids. And if the child says no, then the child doesn't eat. And as hard as that sounds, maybe that will get the child hungry enough to eat what you're offering later.
Wow. Wow, that's a tough one. And
Yeah.
so you're obviously saying there shouldn't be the argument. You just say, okay, well, this is what is being served tonight. Would you like some or would you not? So that kind of diffuses this back and forth of just eat this, don't eat that. And you're just laying it out there is what you're saying as part
Yeah.
of the responsibility.
And the child can say no. Now I have 3 teenagers in the home. So if my wife or I make a dinner, because that's pretty much the only meal we're eating these days together, so make a dinner and put it out, and my child says no, then they're making their own dinner. And they're doing it now. They're not leaving and coming back in an hour and having dessert. They're at this point, at this age, the 3 teenagers, they're making their own dinner.
So now that you brought up teenagers, tell us,
Okay.
let's talk a little bit about teenagers. We'll circle back to the middle schoolers, but the teenager, how do you facilitate that? Because teenagers have a lot more autonomy in terms of sometimes they work a part-time job, they can buy things, they have a lot of more influence outside of the home. How do you navigate that with an older child who are more set in their ways, and your influence on them is not as as prominent as when they were smaller?
Yeah, certainly they're building autonomy. They might have their own money that they've earned in their pocket, and more freedom with driver's licenses and things like that, and friends' houses. So yeah, I'll speak for myself, is that we keep a plant-based home, except for cheese. There are 2 out of my 3 kids like dairy cheese and can't seem to get off of it, but that's their option. Again, if they want that on their meal, they have to go to the fridge themselves and select it and put it on their meal. And they have I have 17-year-old twins. They have their jobs, and they have dates, and they have their own money. And when they're out, we have the plant-based home. But when they're out, they're free to do what they want. Obviously, I'm not there at all, so they're free to do what they want. And now my 17-year-old daughter, she's really down with the plant-based program. She, like I said, ever since a young age, not eating animals was a bonus for her. She's happy to not do it. My son does eat meat out of the home, and that's his choice. He's 17-year-old, and there's not much I can do about it except for the education that we provided him up to this point. But if that's his choice, then that's his choice. It does get into a situation when we'll be out to dinner as a family, and he's like, "Can I order this meat?" And we say no, and then he says, "I'll use my own money," and then we're like, "Okay." So I mean, we just don't want to pay for it. But if he's got a job, if he wants to use his own money, then that's his choice. So that's the situation we're in with the teens.
Yeah, and I want to circle back with the teens, and maybe this will touch on the middle schoolers, I'm not sure. But you brought up your daughter and the animal piece. I've often found it interesting that we have no qualms about showing kids where like strawberries come from or apples come from. And I can remember school trips, growing up in Ohio, we would go to a place where they made maple syrup. So we would go and see how the maple would come out of the tree and their process for making the syrup that goes onto the pancakes or whatever. And but I never saw a slaughterhouse. I mean, I never saw like how that meat, whether it was, chicken meat or beef or pork or any of those things, ended up on my plate. And we shield children from that for a reason, which I find very interesting, that we don't shield them from the plants, but we shield them from the animal piece of it. At what point do you think it's appropriate to share with children the reality of where those foods come from?
Yeah, I don't know. I see a lot of discussion in online groups about this. And I think it really depends on the sensitivity of the child. I mean, I know that as a child, I would have gotten nightmares from that. I was kind of very easily upset by stuff like that. So I don't think that would have been helpful to me as a child. I know my wife did have a conversation with my son, and she'd be like, I would be happy to buy you meat when we're all out to dinner if you request it, as long as she watched this documentary and read this book and we discuss it. Like, she was like, okay, I just want you to know, I forget which of the various documentaries and books that she was, but she's like, I just want you to know where your food's coming from. And if you accept that, then she's like, I'll accept it with you. I'll support you. I'll buy you meat when we're out to dinner. And he's like, no, I don't want to read that. And she's like, well, there's an interesting observation. Like, there's a point.
Exactly.
You didn't account for that answer.
She's a lawyer, but she's like, okay, so I'm not buying you meat, and you have to use your own money, and it's kind of a shame that you don't want to know where your food comes from, but there we are. That's the situation we're in.
I like your wife. I haven't met her, but I like her already.
Yeah, she's a smart cookie. So
she is. So are there any, we're going to talk a little bit, you offer a program for families nourishing your plant-based child, but before we even get to that, are there any resources in terms of videos or movies or documentaries for younger kids and maybe high schoolers that you would recommend that they watch to kind of give them that introduction? Like, maybe you don't have access to go to a slaughterhouse or anything, but do you have any documentaries that you would recommend even for elementary school? Because I know there's the ones that are for the adults that maybe higher level teenagers can have that, but what about for the little kids?
right.
Or is there any kind of shows or documentaries or books around that?
Well, when I'm working with families, and especially with the little kids, I'm mostly focused on the parents in the house, the adults in the house that are feeding and preparing the food and selecting the food. They're the ones that I really want to get on board. So I like, and again, it depends on what their interests are and what their concerns are, but Forks Over Knives, What the Health are all great. I had a teenage young woman who was spending her weekends cleaning up parks in our community. I was like, oh, it's great that you're acting and thinking locally. Let's talk about how our food choices affect the global system. And I encouraged her to watch Cowspiracy. And then, other times I get a young man who's an athlete, or a young woman who's an athlete, and encourage them to watch Game Changers. Which, did you see? There's an announcement this week that they're making a sequel.
I saw that part 2.
So,
I'm so excited. I love the original, but I can't wait to see the part 2. So that's great.
Yeah. So hopefully we'll get some more good vegan propaganda out of that.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't mind calling it propaganda, because I feel like we've been hearing propaganda our whole life about how we need milk and meat, and that's this is just another option for you, that there is this other propaganda out there that has a different message. So yeah, those are the videos I like. And I watched a recent video soon. I don't know if it's widely available. It's called "They're Trying to Kill Us." Have you seen this? Have you heard about
Yes,
this?
yes, yes, yes,
So
yes.
that was really good, bringing up racial justice issues.
Yeah.
And so if I'm working with a family is interested in that, although I don't know, I haven't heard about like where it's streaming or something. I was able to watch
Yeah,
it,
it's a
but I don't
hard one
know.
to find. It's a hard one to find.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but I
Yeah.
don't know what suggestions do you have? What do you
Yeah,
like
because I was
to
trying to figure out
recommend?
suggestions for the little children, because I find that there's this
Yeah,
gap there where if you're trying to show a kid that's 8, 7, not like as an introduction to that, I think those ones will be a little bit too sophisticated. I mean, they might be able to
yeah,
understand it, but not fully. I was wondering if there was resources for the smaller child to kind of, I know there's some children's books out there, even Gigi, Your Spinach in My Teeth, that kind of lay the foundation, but I was, wondering if there was more resources out there for that smaller child to kind of introduce them to that type of thing. So.
I want to ask
no,
you
that's
also
yeah, that's a
about,
good point. I wish
oh, go ahead. I'm sorry, Leigh.
I was getting a little breaking up there, but yeah, that's a good point. I should look into it. I wish there were like some more good resources for that age group, because I haven't seen many out there. So
Yeah. I want to shift gears just a little bit and talk about emotional eating. I have a friend who has a nephew that has stage 3 or class 3 obesity. And it started in his kind of early teen years, and has just gotten worse and worse and worse. And there's definitely kind of a food addiction situation going on. But it started with emotional eating. And I just want to ask you, because we cover that in our program for adults, but hey, it would be so great if we could nip that in the bud, before it even starts. What have you seen or experienced in terms of tackling that specific issue as a root cause of, some of the health issues that you've seen?
yeah, I don't blame anyone for emotional eating. I think again, I really like the evolutionary model, and so many of our stresses in prehistoric times were physical, about the weather and food scarcity and things like that, that if we were to get some calories, it would make sense to eat a lot of them, so that it would ease our stress about what was going on around us that we had so little control of 100,000 years ago. So I think that we've evolved or been designed to seek out calories and get relief of our mental stresses with the calories. And so, yeah, there's a lot of stresses to being a kid these days, and sometimes not a lot of good outlets for that stress other than eating and getting the reward centers of our brain happy from the calories and the sugar and the fat and the salt. And so it's like not surprising that someone would, and I don't blame someone for following that path. Unfortunately, nowadays calories are just so easily available that it can easily lead into obesity. So yeah, I do wonder, and I do, when I do hear about emotional eating, I do worry about someone might have an underlying anxiety disorder or even depression that they're almost self-medicating with. And there are screening tools in the pediatric that are validated in pediatrics that it's good to go through with families and kids to see if maybe they do have this undiagnosed or underlying anxiety disorder. And I've also heard, people that start whatever diets, this or that diet, not just plant-based, but starting any diet that reduces the calories, reduces the added sugar or fats or salts or things like that, that they can report increased anxiety while their comfort foods are yanked away from them. And so, yeah, mental health is a crisis in this country too, as well as the obesity. They may be almost intertwined. So working with someone, getting them the mental health care is important. I can plug a free online program called 7 Cups that has professional listeners for free, that you can talk to someone who's been trained to listen to you and in a non-judgmental way. And it's down to age 13 and up, and it's for adults too. And there are like premium programs where you can go on and work with a more professional something. But if one of your listeners is out there and feeling this anxiety and stresses, that maybe 7 Cups could be helpful as someone to talk to. But I'm kind of changed my tune lately, especially with the American Academy of Pediatrics in January of this year, recommending anti-obesity medicines for even teenagers. That and it's all over the press, it's all over the news how popular these anti-obesity medicines are. But one of the reports that's coming out from these patients is that they finally feel full, that they've never, in all their years of eating, felt full and satisfied enough to step away from the plate and say, I've had enough. And so it works in the brain chemistry to increase satiety. And so for, you're bringing up someone who's emotional eating, and for other people that might be struggling with their weight, I gotta say the evidence is that these medicines, yeah, they have their side effects and they're expensive and controversial in their own way. And who knows what the long-term effects are going to be. But to hear someone say, I've never felt full until I started on this medicine and it's allowed me to step away from the table, that's pretty powerful stuff.
Yeah, I think we would have to have another podcast to debate this. I have strong feelings about the medications. Like, I think part of it is there's no exit strategy for it. I think the other part of it for me is you're not really dealing with the root cause of it. So, but we can table that for another podcast, because I'll just go off on a tangent and I want to keep this focused on the kids. But I think with the emotional eating piece of it, I think it's hard being a young kid. I think it's even worse today than it was when I was coming along. I'm a Gen Xer, and so we didn't have Instagram and social media, pressuring me to look this way or look that way. I mean, yeah, we had like Cosmopolitan and Teen Magazine kind of doing that, but it wasn't so constant and in your face, And I just feel like the dynamics have changed so much that, a different approach kind of has to be used to deal with this, because it is a growing issue. And I haven't figured out, I don't know what the secret sauce is for figuring it out yet, but I do think that there is a spiritual component to it as well. And I know that's something Sersie and I feel strongly about, and some things we're developing. But, let's kind of transition though, because I'm going off, I'll go down a road that has nothing to do with this. Let's kind of circle back to your program, because you gave me the opportunity to kind of go through the course a little bit, and it's called Nourish Your Plant-Based Child. And I just think it's a wonderful resource, because once you do get your child, moved over, at least open to, adopting a whole food plant-based lifestyle, you want to make sure that you're doing it the right way, that you're helping your child, grow and thrive and all those things. Can you maybe share a little bit about the course, the program, who it's for? What are some of the key points that you really emphasize in the program?
Yeah, thanks. It's about 2.5 hours of short videos and reading material that I put together really to help support families who are trying to raise a child plant-based. There's a lot of information about adults eating plant-based, especially to prevent or reverse disease. But as a pediatrician, kids are not just little adults. As I mentioned already, they have smaller stomachs. And so you really got to maximize the nutrition that's going in with that smaller stomach. So yeah, I really wanted to put together a course that would help and support families, especially if they're not able to talk to their own pediatrician, even I take my kids to the pediatrician and the pediatrician's like, well, where are they getting their protein? And what about calcium? And, my kids are like rolling their eyes. So this e-course I put together, I really want to give short, really easily digestible lessons about the nutrients and about the philosophy in general. And then what I really wanted to help is that people would kind of get this nutrition background, this nutrition education to last a lifetime. So you do the few hours of the course, but then you have the tools to go on if a question is raised in a few years that you want to double check about, that the information is there, because and nutrition, there's sections on just really basics of nutrition, and then going all the way up to how to use Chronometer. So Chronometer is a free program online where you can track your diary of foods for the day, and it'll tell you your macros, how much protein, how much carbs, things like that, and then 82 micronutrients, so you can see if you're getting enough selenium or copper or this or that. So there's no real lessons online about how to use this for kids, let alone plant-based kids. So I made a tutorial so you can kind of work along in the tutorial and understand how to use this program. It's free, and I'm not a spokesman for it. It's just a useful program that I use with my own families. And yeah, so going forward, if any question ever does come up, you know how to address it with the Chronometer.
Wow, I love that.
Mhm.
So, so how do families get this program?
Oh, you can go to Doctor Herbivore website, and there's a tab for e-courses that takes you to the e-courses. There's that one, and then there's two others. There's another one called Making the Switch to Plant-Based Eating. It's a guide for all ages. So you were asking about like picky eaters, and there's information there for adults and parents, but also information for raising your child if you want to make the switch for your family too, about younger kids and teenagers and things like that, and really into the psychology of how to make this switch. And then there's a third course for applying the plant-based diet specifically to pediatric obesity. So how to select foods and how to ensure that the child is getting the right amount of nutrients while still reducing their calories, things like that, exercise, all the things that you might need to know as a parent who's struggling with obesity in your family. So the Dr. Herbivore website, e-courses.
Awesome. And we'll put a link to your website in the show notes as well. So Dr. Leigh, thank you so much for joining us today. We're so grateful that you came back. This is the second time you've been on our podcast, and I always learn something new and get something out of it myself. So we're so grateful for your time today, and hope you'll come back again sometime later.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.